Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters around the world. Away from the Ukrainian frontline, there's a battle taking place that is perhaps just as important to Europe, but without a shot being fired. Moldova is home to a substantial Russian minority, plus the pro-Russian rebel region of Transnistria. Moscow is fighting a battle for the hearts and minds of ethnic Russians and others across the country, and it's making significant headway. We're off to Moldova later this year, and in the company of one of Europe's leading experts on the region, Kamil Calus. He joins us now. Hello and welcome, Kamil.
Hello, Nick. Hello to everybody.
Thanks for having us. You there. It's very good to have you as our expert and have you here tonight as well. Can you just say a few words about yourself? You essentially, you're Polish, but you actually are one of the sort of preeminent experts on Moldova. What do you do?
Well, that's probably true, but on the other hand, there are not too many of us in the world. Yes, I'm working as a senior research fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies. It's a Polish government think tank, which is basically serving as an advisory unit subordinated to Chancellor of Prime Minister office. So I'm basically working with Polish administration, Polish parliament, Polish presidential office, and so on and so forth. I'm trying to help them to understand the situation in the Republic of Moldova and in Romania, because those are two countries I'm dealing with. I'm also sometimes working with other mostly European institutions, such as European Parliament. Among the others, I used to write reports for them on the European integration process of Moldova. And also I'm working as a part-time journalist, or rather publicist, writing quite a lot about Moldova and Romania, particularly.
I remember you saying that your grandmother said once, I'd never understand why you take such interest in that place. You're never going to earn any money from it.
That's true. Unfortunately,
yes. Here you are. If only she could see you now. Yeah. Well, listen, Moldova is tiny. It's been in the news quite a bit recently, and so I really want to sort of understand what makes this an area of such critical interest, and notably since the war in Ukraine.
Yes, Moldova was in the news quite often recently, and I believe it will be in the news even more often in the upcoming months, particularly during the time that we'll be there, actually, on the trip. Moldova is basically the borderland and the battleground, the place where Russia, on the one hand, and the collective West, let's put it this way, clashes for influences for quite some time already, but this battle definitely intensified since 2022, maybe a little bit earlier even. Russia traditionally considers Moldova to be part of its sphere of influence, right? Moldova used to be part of the Soviet Union. Moldova, for the better part of 19th century, used to be part of the Russian Empire. We've got significant population of Russian speakers in Moldova. There are around 20% of people or even 30% of people in Moldova who use Russian language on the daily basis, even though most of them are not Russian or of Russian origin. We've got two very interesting regions, and yes, I see you turn on the map, which is very good. We've got one particular Russian-speaking and Russian identity-driven region, which is Transnistria. We can see this on the right side of this map, on the border with Ukraine. This is a separatist republic. We'll be probably talking about it a little bit more later. Anyway, that's the region in which Russian language is not dominating. It's basically the main language, and the region which is base of Russian military, illegally stationed on the territory of Moldova, because even though this region is virtually independent from Moldova, it's formally part of this country. On the other hand, we've got Gagauzia, which is not shown here on this map. It's,
I'll point it out. I mean, Gagauzia is down here at the bottom.
Exactly, to the south. It's a very interesting region as well. It used to be, as Transnistria, an unrecognized republic since 1990 till 1994. It also declared independence, actually declared independence a little bit earlier than Transnistria. It's inhabited by Gagauz people, and now Gagauz people are of Turkic origin. They technically, originally speak Gagauz languages like archaic Turkic language, but first of all, they are Orthodox, not Muslims, and what's even more important, they are very pro-Russian. They consider themselves...
Let me interject a bit. So, I mean, in a way, so we've got Gagauzia here and we've got Transnistria there, which are Gagauzia is an autonomous area within Moldova. Transnistria is of this breakaway state, to put it in a short form. But I suppose one of the other things to emphasize is that the nomenclatura, the middle class, the cities have a significant number of Russian speakers. In actual fact, the sort of lingua franca of the middle classes, of the bourgeoisie, really is Russian.
Definitely. That's because in 19th century, Moldova, what today is Moldova, it used to be called Bessarabia back then, was basically urbanized or settled by Russian speakers. Not necessarily Russians, but people from the Russian Empire. Russians, Ukrainians, Jews, Armenians, Poles, and so on and so forth. And they were using...
the Russians, ethnic Russians, might make up 30% of the population. But in a way, that 30% sort of underlies or belies the Russian influence in Moldova because of the use of the language and the sort of basically the long-term Russian cultural and political influence.
That's true. Actually, the Moldovan identity, Moldovan culture, Romanian language, which Moldovan speaks, came up or become... dominant, let's put it this way, only in 90s into 20th century.
Wow.
Before that, for over 150 years, even more, Russian culture, Russian language, Russian political culture as well, and Russian identity were the dominant one.
Yeah.
And we can still see this process of nation building and identity building in Moldova taking place right now, which is reflected also among the political parties and in the political sphere. But that's only Russia. On the other hand, we've got the West, right? I don't want to get too much into details, but I would to mention just one very important country, and it's Romania. Because if on the one hand, Russia considers Moldova to be part of its area of influence, traditional one, and place where Russian culture is existing or thriving even, or used to thrive for many, many decades, Romania considers Moldova to be a historical part of Romania. Romanians consider Moldovans to be part of the same nation. They don't really recognize Moldovans as a separate state. And therefore, they are fighting with Russian influences. Romania, right? NATO and EU member state is fighting with Russians for the souls, hearts, and minds of Moldovans. And Romania would like to bring Moldova as close to the European Union as possible, actually to, have Moldova as a member of European Union, maybe to reunite with Moldova. There are politicians and political parties in Romania, most of them are in favor of reunification. And on the other hand, we've got Russia, who is definitely willing not to do this.
I mean, the obvious point to make is that Romania geographically is there. I mean, Moldova and Romania are right next to each other, and Russia is some way off. I mean, and this is why obviously the war in Ukraine is going to be so critical to this region, not just to Moldova as well. But Russia at the moment is a long way off, and so the Russian influence it comes in a different. There are Russian troops in Transnistria. I'm going to come to them in just a second. But in terms of its political influence and influence through the Russian population and the sort of historical links versus this big Romanian influence next door. So let's jump on to Transnistria then. I'll bring the map back up again just so people can see it again there. How on earth did this tiny slither, which really traces the Dniester, the river, become a sort of a would-be Soviet republic that has broken away from Moldova?
Long story short, because this story can be really long, but I don't want to bore all of our listeners and watchers now. So basically, Moldova, the part without Transnistria, right? Moldova proper, as I said before, historically used to be part of what today is Romania, right? It's Romanian historical land. It's inhabited mostly by Moldovans or Romanians, if you'll ask people in Bucharest. 70–80% of people living on this piece of land are of this origin. On the other hand, Transnistria historically was Transnistria, was historically part of Novorossiya. It used to be part of the Russian Empire way before Moldova. Today, Moldova became part of the Russian Empire.
Okay, Kamil, I'm going to give you that one, but I'm going to push back at that one. It wasn't because that they had long historical links to Russia that place suddenly declared that it was going to be an independent state. Give us the short-term reasons. You go back to 1991, we go back to the breakup of the Soviet Union. There are a lot of people in power, particularly influential people, who weren't happy with the idea of Moldova becoming an independent state because they would lose their power and influence.
That's of course true. I just wanted to bring this 19th century history to show why there is a huge difference in the ethnical composition, which is important in terms of 1991. So basically, Transnistria is inhabited mostly, like to 70%, 80% by non-Moldovans, by Russian speakers, by Ukrainians, Russians, Jews, and so on and so forth. When Moldova in the end of 80s started to, becoming independent or initiated the process of Romanian national revival, people living on the left bank of these two rivers, so in Transnistria, Russian speakers started to get worried that if Moldova would become Romanized, if Moldova maybe will become part of Romania, because that was the will of the political class which took over power in the 90s, they will become second-class citizens. So we had this part of the story. And on the other hand, and you were mentioning this already, we had the so-called Red Directorate. So let's put it this way, higher class or the higher echelon of society in Transnistria, managers of factories, of the entire heavy industry, which was concentrated in this part of the republic. 40% of GDP of Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic was produced on this tiny slip of land, which you're pointing to right now with the mouse cursor. And those people were not Moldovans. They were brought there to Transnistria from Russia, from Ukraine, from Belarus, from all around Soviet Union. They were Soviet people speaking Russian, and they were afraid that if Moldova would become more, let's put it this way, nationalistic, if Moldovans, Romanian speakers would take over, and God forbid, if Moldova would become part of Romania.
So Kamil, at that point, I'm going to cut you short, I'm going to shorten your answers here because we've got to compress a lot of information. There was a conflict. There's a conflict that took place for a year and a half, and you have to summarize the period of time, but basically Russia put a stop to it, and you had this little statelet, and the Russians were sent there as peacekeepers, and they are there to this day, which is that's the surprising thing. You still have Russian troops within Transnistria. That's
true. The truth is that basically Transnistria declared independence under leadership of those people who comprised this Red Directorate in 1990, September 1990. And when Moldova proper, forces loyal to Chisinau wanted to take over control of this rebel region, full-scale war started. And this war was won finally by Transnistria, thanks to the Russian forces, which were located. They were not even sent there because they were already located in Transnistria. There was so-called 14 Russian army, which was simply dispatched there or were stationed there since 70s. And Russian forces helped separatists to defend themselves from forces loyal to Chisinau. And this is how it all started, and this is how it all ended up. And we are right now still in the same situation. We still got Russian troops. There is no army there. There's around 1,500 Russian soldiers stationing in the region. And they serve as you said, peacekeepers. At least this is how they perceive themselves. Moldova consider them to be occupation forces.
Okay. I'm going to describe it a bit. We do go there, and we've run several tours there now. And it is an incredible. It's sort of frozen in aspect. It's a Soviet throwback. It's got statues of Lenin everywhere. The streets are pretty empty. Not very many cars. Economic activity limited to what you would call sort of state-backed industries. cheap Russian gas that has fueled those, really just kept the economy going. Population of around 300,000. I mean, it's a miracle that the economy keeps going. And then the other amazing thing, the person who runs or owns most of those industries is an oligarch who, wait for it, lives in Germany. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. So that we're going to come back to Transnistria in just a bit, but I think it's really important for people who are to trying to get a grips with this place. Transnistria is one of the big conundrums. What happens to Transnistria, and how does it shape things in Moldova? Can you give us an idea of what has been the sway of politics in Moldova? It's not in the EU. Does it have a pro-EU government? Has it had pro-Russian governments? And how democratic is it? How much influence and corruption has there been? And I'm going to ask a question which would have parallels in both Ukraine and in Russia. How influential are oligarchs?
Moldova right now, since 2020, 2021, for the first time basically in its history, is governed by the truly democratic government, by the Party of Action and Solidarity, led by President Maia Sandu, who recently won election for the second time, was re-elected. And this is probably the first time when we've got truly pro-Western government willing to integrate this country to the European Union, willing to get rid of corrupt judges, willing to make this country independent from Russian influences. Because for many, many years before, this country was led either by openly pro-Russian forces. There was, for example, Communist Party in power since 2001 to 2009, or parties or politicians who were claiming to be pro-European, but in reality, they were simply oligarchs willing to make as much money as possible on all possible dirty businesses, of course, in cooperation with Russia as well. And the most well-known oligarch of all of them was Vlad Plahotniuc, the guy who, is accused of many things, starting from human trafficking and ending up on drug dealing and drug trafficking, but who is also considered to be behind the greatest financial scandal in the history of Moldova, when in 2014, $1 billion were stolen from 3 Moldovan banks. In the moment when it happened, $1 billion was 30% of the budget of Moldova. Wow. 30%, 1/3. Yeah.
So that's the background to Moldovan politics. Jump forward to 2022. Russia invades Ukraine. Moldova must have got an enormous shock at that point, a realization that Russia was willing to use force to essentially gain control of the population that it saw as its own.
That's true. I remember this very well. I was on the meeting with certain representatives of Moldovan government. Back then they were visiting Warsaw. And as we already mentioned, those are people from the pro-Western government, right? Who is definitely anti-Russian. And those people were terrified. They were very much afraid because at the very beginning of the war in 2022, not too many were hoping that Ukraine will stand, right? So as far as I know, government in Chisinau was actually trying to reach to Bucharest, asking whether they will accept them as the refugees, to form a government in exile. So we can imagine how afraid they were. Then, for another couple of months, where the situation wasn't really clear, they were trying to lay low. They were not criticizing Russia. They were trying to hold to their neutrality, because Moldova is a formally neutral country. They were, yes, supporting Ukraine politically. They were criticizing Russia for attacking Ukraine, but at the same time, they were trying to not provoke Russia. It changed after a couple of months when it turned out that Ukraine is holding.
So suddenly the tables actually turn. Yes. And Ukraine actually offers at one point to actually invade Transnistria and get rid of the Russian troops there. The border, which has been on Transnistria, that eastern border along Ukraine, which has been really a sort of a corridor for Russian influence, Russian trade, and the Ukrainians very happy to have a black market going back and forth before 2022. Suddenly, the Ukrainians see that border as a problem. They don't want those Russian troops taking part in the conflict in Ukraine. So the border is sealed on both sides. And suddenly Transnistria, which has been a thorn in the side of Moldova for a very, very long time, suddenly finds itself cut off from its Russian supply. So, and this goes back some time in terms of the resupply of the Russian troops. So the tables turn.
The tables turned, and Transnistria became very much dependent on Chisinau. But at the same time, Chisinau finally realized, it took some time, but finally realized that it's a good moment, that it's a window of opportunity they can use to accelerate process of European integration, accelerate the process of running away from Russia, and also bringing Transnistria closer to them. In 2022, Moldova became a candidate state for the European Union. 2 years later, it started negotiation process, and as you said, it also started putting more pressure on Transnistria to bring it back to, as Chisinau is putting it, a legal field of Moldova.
Yeah, I feel this is a bit like a roller coaster. The conversation in this sort of pendulum going back and forth, up and down in terms of pro-Russian influence. I know people are going to have questions. I encourage people to start putting questions down early. So please do put your questions about anything about Moldova in the Q&A box, and we can put those questions to Kamil. So for a while, Kamil, it seemed that the pro-European forces or the anti-Russian forces, that the fear of Russia actually being able to walk into Moldova was removed, and that the significant momentum behind joining the European Union, not NATO, but joining the European Union, which would give Moldova a sense of security. And again, we roll forward again to the current day, which is, I think, really what we want to speak about at the moment, is the election of Donald Trump. And once again, things change. What has been the impact of Trump's election on Moldova and the region? And I guess we've got to talk about Romania.
Yes. So first of all, I must say that, well, Chisinau is still probably surprised of the actions of Donald Trump and his administration. The biggest blow came from Washington. I mean, usually Moldova was expecting getting hit by Russia, and this time it came from Washington when Donald Trump decided to freeze U.S. aid help and assistance for Moldova. United States till January 2025 used to be the largest state donor of help for Moldova, and even though
which is essentially the poorest country in Europe.
Exactly. And even though Trump is quite often saying, even recently he pointed to Moldova saying that, oh, we are financing cohesion or inclusion in the electoral process, most of those funds were going not for walk projects. They were going to enforce Moldova energy security, to help in conducting proper elections and, get rid of Russian influences, to build infrastructure able to, or helping Moldova to fight with Russian hybrid threats, and so on and so forth, not to mention development of economy and things like that. So the fact that U.S. actually frozen those assets was a big problem. Additionally, because it's not only about money, it's also about rhetorics. I mean, Trump, Musk, J.D. Vance, they started to call U.S. aid criminal organization. They started to attack its own influence of soft power in the exact same way as Russians were doing this for last decades.
Echoing Russian speaking points about U.S. influence.
Totally. So when Igor Dodon, leader of the largest pro-Russian party in Moldova, former president, recently came back from Moscow, he said, "Thank you, Mr. Musk. Thank you for saying what we are saying all the time, that USAID is simply criminal organization which is financing revolutions, colorful revolutions, and trying to, influence the situation in other countries. This is what we used to say all the time. So thank you. We're on the same page."
Okay, so now we have to look at how easily Russia can shape things. And I want to talk about a couple of things. We'll talk about media in just a moment and the influence it has in the media. But just in terms of votes, let's go to the last elections and the referendum. There was a referendum on EU membership, which is seen as a critical thing. Many Moldovans go and work in the EU. Many Moldovans have got Romanian passports, so they can travel throughout the Euro. So ostensibly, Moldova gets a huge amount of income from people going to work in the EU. Yet, that referendum on EU membership was almost lost and really only won because of the votes from the diaspora, people abroad voting in the election. Why was it so close? What happened?
Well, first of all, we need to bring up another very important political figure in Moldova, Ilan Shor. That's a very interesting gentleman, businessman and a politician who ran away from Moldova in 2019 to Israel. Now he lives in Moscow. He's got Russian citizenship. But even though he lives abroad for a couple of years already, he is in control of currently 4 political parties in Moldova. He's being supported by around 15% of general public. And using his network of political parties, organizations, and so on, plus using a huge amount of money he's having at his disposal, he managed to buy significant, and I will say exactly the number in a moment, number of votes. So he managed to contact people, Moldovans, and literally pay them to vote the way he liked. He was using as I said, the local organizations on the ground, but also he was using Telegram and bots on this communicator on the Telegram, and those bots were simply approaching people. They were, AI driven, asking whether they would be willing to sell vote for 10 euro, 20 euro, 30 euro. There are different prices. According to Moldovan secret services, he managed to buy votes of around at least 130,000 Moldovans.
That's the population of, or an electorate of how many?
So we got around 1.5 million voters. There's 2.4 million. So 10%, more or less, 10% of votes. Wow. And one more thing, as far as we know, he spent around $40 million in order to buy those votes. We should compare this to money which were spent by all political parties or all the presidential candidates. As far as I know, it used to be around 2 to 3 million euro for all candidates. So he spent over 12 times more just to buy votes.
So 40 million from him versus 12 million for the rest, everybody else is campaigning. It's a vast amount of money. The other thing I've got to mention is that with a Russian population, you've got many people who are watching Russian media. And this is going to be true for Russians living in the Baltic states. You've got Russians who live within the EU and other parts of Europe, whose main source of information comes from
different Russian media. I would say that a couple of years ago, they were mostly watching Russian TV stations, which are available in Baltic states or in Moldova. Now, particularly in all of those countries, including Moldova, Russian TV stations are banned. But unfortunately, it's not really helping because people are simply watching YouTube channels, they are watching Telegram, they are watching TikTok. And they are using internet in order to get to the information they want. Plus, there are also certain, it's not even TV, there are also, like those groups on Telegram, groups on WhatsApp, groups on Facebook, which are bringing Russian propaganda to all those people.
Yeah. And the Russian state media budget, if we were just going to talk about TV, let alone all these other operations, is actually almost as big as I think it's about half the GDP of Moldova in total. So there's no way a tiny state like Moldova can compete with the likes of Russia when it comes to actually influence online.
Of course. Let me just get back for a moment to this US8. Most of Moldovan pro-Western public TV, private TV stations, which were focusing on information, not on entertainment, had to get additional financial assistance from abroad because they simply couldn't work without this assistance, without this aid, because the market is too small for them to operate. And Russia is not really thinking about this. additional thing, Russia is not only bringing its propaganda like straightforward. It's not only about Solovyov or all those, political talk shows, which is spreading the fake news. No, it's also about Russian pop culture. Russian entertainment or Russian show business is usually selling or even giving for free a lot of quite interesting serious movies and so on and so forth, which are entertaining, but they are also building positive image of Russia, positive image of KGB, positive image of, Russian police, and so on and so forth. And this is how it works.
What I want to emphasize here, and we've done tours in the Baltics here, is that this is a conflict that's taking place on the airways. It's taking place in terms of propaganda and influence operations. If we think of the Baltics, you've got those countries are both members of the EU and also members of NATO. And their main concern is of a Russian invasion, some kind of operation to try and destabilize them using violence. But what we're seeing here in Moldova is something that doesn't require troops in any way at all. It's an influence operation that doesn't, with small amounts of money, relatively small amounts of money, to shape and influence a whole country.
Definitely. For Russia in Moldova, it's enough to use hybrid, like cognitive, as we call it right now, cognitive war, right? They are fighting for hearts and minds of the people. They are trying to bring chaos into people's minds, basically, right? And to at the same time parallelly build political or finance political forces, which then can get support from those people and take over power. And I just want to add one thing. So for a long time, Russia was simply financing pro-Russian forces, like obviously pro-Russian forces, those which were, supporting integration with Russia. Now it's a little bit different. Russia is also supporting so-called centrist party, which are very much in line with MAGA movement, with alt-rights. So they are officially pro-Western, they are officially pro-EU, but at the same time they want to keep tradition of Moldovan people in place. They don't want LGBT, they don't want all those pesky Western left inventions and so on and so forth. And the truth is that those people get a lot of attention of the general public, even of those people who are not openly pro-Russian, but their goal after getting to power is to block process of European integration. It's what is happening in Georgia, for example, where we technically have got pro-Western forces in power, but they are also against certain ideas which are very much
the Russian foreign policy, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to force people to ask questions. You've got to raise your hand. So either hit the raise your hand button or put the question in the Q&A box. We'll talk briefly about Romania, and then I want to circle back to Moldova and talk about the things we actually see on our tour that helps illustrate this. I mean, many people watching have been with us to Moldova, or they've been with us to the Baltic states, but we basically try and bring all these issues to life by seeing ordinary people and the politicians, so you actually get to understand everything we're talking about yourself. You can see it all in action. Vance made those comments about Romania because there was a conservative pro-Russian candidate, Georgescu, who won the presidential vote. I mean, it's quite astounding. But what I want to emphasize there is that, yes, there was a Russian influence and operation that backed bots and social media. But at the same time, both the Russians and that candidate were appealing to populist conservative sentiment. And you can see that across Europe. Definitely.
I'm actually in favor of the idea that Russians were involved in the process, but, well, without a fertile ground, let's put it this way, nothing like that would happen. People in Romania are really fed up with their political mainstream, which is in power basically since the very beginning of the 90s. I mean, there are virtually two parties. One, the post-communist Socialist Party, Social Democratic Party, and on the other hand, the central-right National Liberals, who are either switching sides. I mean, they are,
and many cases of corruption with politicians stuffing things.
Very many. I mean, the perception of the general public in Romania of their own political class is terrible. They feel that those people are corrupted, that they don't really represent them. And what's even more important, Romania, Romania is growing big. I mean, Romania is one of the fastest growing economy in European Union. Standard of living, quality of life is increasing, and people feel that those politicians who are in powers and like for the last 30 years are simply not representing them. They don't thinking big enough. They are not.
Which is ironic. So their own standards of living have gone up, and their lives have improved dramatically. Yet, because they're disaffected with their political class, quite rightly, they're potentially going to undo what they have. I mean, that's conjecture possibly on my part, but that's seems a fairly fair analysis. Let's take some questions. We've got Charles B, who's got a question. Charles, open your microphone and put your question to Kamil.
Hi, thanks very much. It's very interesting to hear your account of the scale and extent of Russian influence in Moldova. What I'm wondering is, to what extent is the EU taking steps to counter Russian influence in Moldova by exerting its own influence?
That's a very, very good question. So basically speaking, EU is one of the most important, if not the most important, the external actor supporting Moldova in this term. First of all, EU is trying to put as much money in Moldova as it's possible in order to increase its resilience when it comes to energy, increase its resilience when it comes to economy, but also build certain institutions which will be able to resist those hybrid threats. And for example, just 2 years ago, European Union set up the so-called EU partnership mission in Moldova, which is basically there to help Moldova to develop its cybersecurity and hybrid threats, defense institutions. Also, EU is only recently, just 5 days ago, EU decided to grant Moldova the largest financial assistance package of 1.9 billion euro, which shall be spent in the upcoming 2.5 years until 2027. Again, it's a package which meant to, increase the economy grow, or the pace of the economy grow, to develop electric and gas interconnection, for example, with Romania, in order to make Moldova more independent.
I think Charles has hit on a really good point, because fundamentally, Europe provides peace, at a very, very basic level, and economic growth. And it has enriched the lives of many Moldovans who go and work in Europe. Yet it's hard for politicians or for the EU to express that. It is such a procedural bureaucracy, a very successful one, that it's not really apparent in the minds of ordinary Moldovan voters. And a populist has far more success in a way. I'm sorry, I'm sort of butting in, Charles, but this is, my take. Yeah.
I mean, so what we're saying here is there's a real contrast between the actual scale of EU institutional support and the complete failure of the EU to get the message across, and that's reflected in the very, very small majority in favour of EU integration.
Yeah, and that majority in favour of the integration was due to the votes of people who were living in the EU, so who were less exposed perhaps to the propaganda or the influence operations within Moldova, and possibly less disaffected with their own government as a result. But I just think it's inherent in the way the EU works. You've got 26 member states. You have who knows the difference between the Council of Europe and the European Council? The Council of Ministers and what the EU Parliament does. It's just it's too abstract. That's glossing over it. I know in some EU countries or member states, actually they know who the commissioners are. They know certainly who their commissioners are, and there's a greater awareness of it. But in its current environment, the success of the EU is really hard to get across. Even Transnistria depends upon sales to the EU. Transnistria, that pro-Russian state with the KGB, the MKB, the equivalent of the KGB there today, is dependent upon sales to Europe. It needs to have access to EU markets to thrive. So it's anyway, Kamil, you go ahead.
Yeah, just let me add one more thing, which is very paradoxical, and it exactly shows what you are talking here about. Gagauzia, which, as we already mentioned, is very much pro-Russian. And if I remember the result of the referendum in Gagauzia, it was like 98% in favor against joining European Union, or 97. This is the region which received enormous amount of investment from European Union. Roads are being built, schools are being, refurbished, and so on and so forth. And Gagauz people, I was speaking with them, we were speaking with them, Gagauz know about, they know that it's EU funding those things, and it's not influencing their perception of European Union. And from my perspective, and I've been talking about this recently in Brussels with my colleagues from different EU institutions, is that EU is not physically there on the ground. There is no face. There are no people. I was always thinking about more a need to send kind of EU missionaries. I'm talking about volunteers, like regular people from the EU who will be, going to the field, going to the villages, going to those towns and speak with those people. Because if some regular Gagauz guy from a small village, see commissioner coming to Chisinau and meeting with Maia Sandu, president of Moldova, he definitely, he cannot relate, right? It's like, another oligarch, another high-ranking politician in a limo. Yeah. What can we have from that? Yeah, they are bringing this 1.9 billion euro, which is unimaginable for a regular Moldovan, and they don't see anything. It would be better to actually spend even less money, but on the smaller projects, so people can see with their own eyes persons who are doing that, and not necessarily just finance, just put those enormous amount of money into this assistance. But that's the other thing, right? I heard also that, generally speaking, EU, when they don't know what to do and how to act, they are giving money. Yeah. And that's what we can see in Moldova to that extent.
We're going to wrap up in a few minutes' time. Please, if you've got any more questions, anyone, do chip in. And I just want to sort of talk about what we do roughly on tour. Karen, if you're in the background there, if you do have any photos, I was just having a quick look to see some of the photos from our tour. We go into Transnistria, which is not controlled by the Moldovan government. It has Russian, ostensibly peacekeeping troops. It is a walk back into the past. It is quite empty. Soviet apartment blocks. It's very clean. In some ways, it actually reminds me of a much better-looking North Korea. North Korea is sort of grim compared to Transnistria, I have to say. And we spend just under 2 days there, and we get a sort of good idea of what the economy is. We also visit Gagauzia, which is essentially just another region of Moldova, but overtly, very openly pro-Russian. And so you'll have conversations with people along those lines. And then you meet, back in Chisinau, you meet lots of politicians, lots of journalists. You get very good access. We've had very good access to government ministers previously, and you get a whole range and mix of opinions. And one of the people we met recently, I think, going to be the leading pro-Russian MP who's just formed. He's just formed his own political party. Kamil, what's going on with him?
Marek Skaczuk, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, last time we met a guy who used to be the brain of the Communist Party, the one which was in power between 2001 and 2009, and only recently, he had his small political party for quite some time already. Then he was coordinating electoral campaign of Alexandru Stoianoglu, guy who almost won with Maia Sandu, current president of Moldova, running for re-election. And now he set up a coalition with mayor of Chisinau, with this candidate for presidency and another politician. And, well, they seem to be together one of the most important, probably the third largest political power in the country. The centrist one, as I said, right?
Yeah. So one question, Kamil, I had, can you think of short-term outcomes? We don't know what's going to be going on with Ukraine. If you see a pro-Russian, you could see a pro-Russian president in Romania. Who knows? There's a lot that hangs in the balance. I mean, it's very difficult for us to make projections, but just see, how do you see the next few months developing? One of the big things we know about is that Moldova ran out of gas, or lost its gas supplies to Russia at the beginning of the year, and it hadn't bought enough to make up the difference, which is a bit of a political scandal. But just give us an idea of what's happening in the next few months.
Yeah, we'll have two probably key issues which will be influencing political situation or general situation in Moldova. So first thing is energy crisis, which is still going on in Transnistria. We did not really mention that before, but Transnistria used to receive free Russian gas for last 3 decades. That was a pillar of Transnistrian economy. It allowed Transnistria to produce cheap goods, which then were sold to the European Union. Since the beginning of 2025, Transnistria is not able to receive Russian gas anymore because Ukraine cut transit from Russia, and Transnistria needs to import gas through Moldova, and it's not getting enough gas. It's getting only half of the gas it requires, so economy of Transnistria is basically frozen. So when we'll be there, probably, Transnistria will be already on the verge or even deep inside the economic crisis, which will bring her closer to Chisinau, but also which will be, very problematic. It will destabilize the situation in the region. So that's the first thing, what will happen with Transnistria and its economy. Second thing, elections. Moldova had presidential elections last year, and referendum, which we've already mentioned, but it will also hold parliamentary election in September. So when we'll be there, probably campaign will already start, and the problem is that the ruling party of Action and Solidarity, the Prester one, which now have a majority in the parliament, will probably not be able to repeat the success of 2021, so get another 50% of votes.
It's going to be a very, trickily balanced period. It's going to be a lot of period of uncertainty at the same time as events taking place in Ukraine. We've got a few photographs being flashed up. I will just say one of the most peculiar things we've done in Transnistria is going to see a caviar farm. Transnistria, because of the cheap that's been supplied with free Russian gas, has cement works, steel works, and caviar farms, all of which use intensive amounts of energy, and they get it free, so they can sell it into the EU market at cut prices. So it's quite ridiculous. I have to say, going around, I didn't know how caviar. I had a rough idea of how caviar was made. Well, I know how it's made, but how it's farmed is pretty horrendous. We'll say no more. But Transnistria is well worth the visit, and it's very safe to visit. And the other good thing about Moldova is that it's compact. You can cover a lot of ground, and people are very, very willing to talk to you as well. So there's some sturgeons swimming around a pool, and they're stuck in those pools for ages. Do we have any other photographs there, Karen? Maybe we don't. Maybe we just got a few more. I don't know. No, that's it. Just sturgeons. It's just a brief insight into the madness that is Transnistria. That's it, everyone. Thanks very much indeed for your questions. Do stay online. We'll sum up what tours are coming up. We've got another talk coming up also next month, which is going to be about Taiwan. So please do stay on the line to hear about the upcoming tours and talks. And my thanks again to Kamil Calus for his time. It's been a very, very interesting 3/4 of an hour. Thank you very much indeed, Kamil. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to see you all in Moldova.